If you want to get married to your South African hun, understand that if you don't want your marriage to be in community of property, make sure that your anti-nuptial contract is in place before you start making any payments towards the lobola. What happens if you have paid the lobola amount in part and not in full? Does that mean you are married? Just because you didn't sign anything or register your marriage with a magistrate or marriage officer does not invalidate it. You are still legally married, okay?
Now listen, daughter, pay attention, pray and listen, hear your father.
What's good, beautiful people? Welcome to my channel. My name is Shella and I am an admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa. Now today I am going to be shining light on customary marriages in South Africa. Yes, I'm going to be talking about Lobola because I know there is some confusion relating to customary marriages in South Africa. Once you've paid Lobola, are you married? Are there certain things you need to do before or after for your marriage to be recognized? What do you do when you want to dissolve the marriage? Does the normal course of divorce take place, or is there a way for you to dissolve your customary marriage? Well, today I'm going to be shining light on those questions and a little bit more. So get comfortable, grab a snack and a drink or a pen and a paper. And without wasting any more time, let's get into this video. Please like this video and subscribe to this channel, and let's get into it. Paying lobola has legal implications. Before we get into that, I think it's important to define what lobola is. And lobola is defined in the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act 120 of 1998, and it defines lobola as property in cash or in kind that the prospective husband or the head of the husband family undertakes to give to the bride's family or the head of the bride's family in consideration of a customary marriage. So from this definition, we already know that lobola needs to be set in order for a customary marriage to take place. So the lobola amount is negotiated by the two families, the prospective husband's family and the prospective wife's family. So, the prospective wife's family would say, these are the requirements, or these are the things that we want, be it gifts or money, usually gifts and money. And then negotiations take place between the two families, and then they agree on an amount and the gifts that must be brought in. So from this, we can already note that a prospective husband cannot just come with a sum of money and a gift or two and say this is for lobola. No, it needs to be negotiated first. And it also takes me to the requirements of a valid customary marriage. And the requirements are that both parties must be 18 years or older, and they must consent to be married via customary law, and that the marriage must be celebrated, entered into, and concluded in terms of customary law. And that obviously includes lobola. Now let's get to the very important part, and that is what happens if you have paid the lobola amount in part and not in full. Does that mean you are married? Well, the simple answer is yes. You don't have to pay the full lobola amount for you to be considered married in terms of customary law. There's nothing in the act that states that you have to pay the full amount in order for the marriage to be valid. And note this as well. This one is so important. When you are married in terms of customary law, if you do not have an antenuptial contract, your marriage is automatically assumed to be in community of property. So that means that if you don't have a valid antenuptial contract before making any lobola payments, your marriage will be in community of property. And I think this is where a lot of people miss it. A lot of people think that they will choose their marital regime after the payment of lobola, and that's not how it works with customary marriages. So super important, before you even start making any payments for lobola, go see an attorney and have an antenuptial contract drafted if you do not want your marriage to be in community of property. And then once you have that in place, then you can start making payments towards the lobola price. So just to touch on the in community of property concept, so this means that the wife's estate and the husband's estate now form and become a joint estate. It becomes one estate. So the parties' debts, the parties' assets now come together and they form one estate. I like to make this analogy. I call it the stew analogy. And I think this, explains in community of property so much better. The husband brings in the tomatoes, wife brings in the spices, husband brings the meat, wife brings the soup, and it's all in one pot. It now becomes one thing. It becomes, one stew. When it's time for the marriage to dissolve, husband doesn't take his potatoes, wife takes onions, husband takes out his meat. No, it has all been infused. It is one thing. So you can't take out, the ingredients that you came in with. What you do is he takes half the stew, she takes half the stew. That's how you, separate the joint estate. That's what happens when you are going to dissolve a customary marriage or a marriage in community of property. So important to know that. So if you don't want that to happen when your marriage dissolves, or the implications that come with being married in community of property, for example, debts, you guys are, now you have one estate, therefore your debts are one. If the other person, is in severe debt, you don't even have this issue of if one person is in debt, the estate is in debt. The debt is not only on one person's shoulder, because the estate is one, it's on both of your shoulders. So that's how it is. There's no me. It's we. Another thing also with marriages in community of property, when you are, still married, I'm not talking about divorces, when you are still married, you can't get rid of certain assets without the knowledge or the consent of your spouse. You can't be like, well, this is my car, therefore I'm going to sell it and do this with the money. You can't, because everything now forms part of one estate. You can't just take out the meat from the stew without your spouse's consent. So you can't just take out assets from the joint estate without the consent or the knowledge of your spouse. So essentially, when you are married in community of property, you lose that right to dispose of assets as you please, or as you would if you were married out of community of property, or if you were single. So you lose that when you get married in community of property. Another thing that I have to bring to light is the fact that marriages concluded in terms of customary law need to be registered. So once you have paid the full Lobola price, you are considered to be married in community of property. It is a valid marriage, but you still need to register the marriage. So you need to go to Home Affairs with your, pictures or, things that will show that the marriage was indeed celebrated in terms of customary law. You bring in witnesses that were there. You bring in, the letter. If you don't know, what happens usually in Lobola negotiations, there'll be letters that are written, so they will document how much was paid by the prospective husband's family, the elders who are receiving the gifts or the money will also write down on a letter. These letters are dated and signed by the elders, and you'll bring in those letters as well as proof of your marriage. And you will have to go to Home Affairs with that and register your marriage within 3 months. Now, here comes the big misconception. Here is the big, huge misconception. People think that if they don't register their marriage, or they don't sign anything at the magistrate court office, or, they don't sign with a marriage officer, their marriage is invalid. Let me clear that misconception right now. That is nothing but a misconception. Whether you register the marriage or you don't, it still does not invalidate it. This whole thing is super popular. Let me tell you, in practice, so many people have just left their marital homes and separated, and they think that it's a divorce because they have not signed anything or nothing was registered to that effect, or to show that a marriage was concluded. But you are forgetting that Lobola did take place. And once Lobola takes place, you are married in community of property. So what happens when you have failed to register your marriage within 3 months? Does that mean that you can just walk away from the marriage, and since you did not sign anything, there won't be any implications? Well, the answer is no. Failure to register your customary marriage does not invalidate it. So your marriage will still be legal, although you won't have a marriage certificate. So the letters that, were exchanged during the Lobola negotiations will serve as proof of a valid customary marriage having been concluded. So this is where the kicker is. A lot of people walk away from their customary marriages thinking that, well, since I didn't sign anything at Home Affairs or the Magistrates Court office or with a marriage officer, I'm not really married because I didn't sign anything, I didn't register anything. And that does not work like that with customary marriages in South Africa. Whether you sign or you don't, you are still married, and you are married in community of property. With that said, it means that you cannot conclude another marriage with another person without the consent of your spouse. When you have concluded a customary marriage, you are allowed to get married to another wife. You are allowed to conclude another marriage, but you cannot do so if you don't have the consent of your first spouse, whether the marriage with your first spouse was registered or not. So a husband cannot go and marry another wife without the consent of the first wife, and that is the wife that he has paid lobola for. Even if that marriage is not registered, you still need the consent of the first wife. You still need consent of the first wife if you want to dispose of the assets, because the marriage is considered to be in community of property. So what happens if you have paid the lobola price, have failed to register the marriage, but want to get a divorce? Since you don't have a marriage certificate, how is divorce going to work? So what would happen is that you need to register your customary marriage first. So you won't do the normal going to Home Affairs and registering the marriage, because that is only valid for 3 months after the marriage. That's when you can do that. But when you want to, let's say years down the line, you want to get a divorce, what you do is you go to the High Court and you make an application. In this application, you will show that the marriage was celebrated and entered into. You will obviously have to bring, pictures and letters from the Lobola negotiations to show that a valid customary marriage was concluded, witnesses, pictures, things like that. And then you will make an application to the High Court, and once that application has been granted, you will receive a marriage certificate. So essentially that application is for you to get a marriage certificate, and once you get your marriage certificate, then you can go about going the normal divorce route, just like anyone else who has a marriage certificate. So since customary marriages, like I said, are considered to be in community of property, then your marriage will be dissolved as such, and the joint estate will be divided equally between you and your spouse. And that is it. I've just addressed a couple of questions that I usually get in practice, and I think were important to note for South Africans or people, desiring to get married to beautiful South African hands. I hope that you have learned a thing or two from this video, and that you will make the necessary decisions before paying lobola. I hope that this information was valuable and that you can use it to make the right decisions before getting into customary marriages. Let's not be a generation that is ignorant to certain things. Let us research and know things before we get into them. Until then, I'm sending you tons of love and light. Bye.